everyone. I am here with good friend, great guy, and just knows everything about hockey. So we're going to put him to the test. We're not going to ask the obvious stuff. We're not going to just poke around and say, "Oh, what do you think?" None of those
way too much
questions.
of a build-up, Steve. You're giving me way too much of a build-up here.
None of those questions. If I can stump you once, Hags, I will have done my job today. Okay. Quick message. Give us a quick background. You're a Boston guy.
Yep.
What was it like? Where'd you roughly grow up in? What was the hockey influence at that time?
Yeah, I grew up in Stoneham. Went through the Stoneham school system, Stoneham High School. Plenty of hockey, figure skating, obviously, with Nancy Kerrigan being from Stoneham. I went to high school with her. I went to high school with a bunch of great hockey players. Derek Edgerly, who's been a head coach at Wakefield High and other places around here, who's drafted by the Blackhawks out of Stoneham High when I was going there. The Seabury triplets played there. There's a lot of hockey history in Stoneham, so I grew up in a town that was hockey crazy. We have the Stoneham Arena there, of course, which is one of the older arenas around too, where everybody plays. And my whole family has a hockey background too. It's funny, I didn't actually play hockey. I played baseball and football. But my uncle is in the UMass Lowell Hockey Hall of Fame. Mike Garagoshin, he's a goalie. He was the goalie coach at Boston University under Jack Parker for like forever. He retired a few years ago, but he still runs All-American goalie camp, the hockey camps. His son Adam Garagoshin was a goalie and played at Northeastern. His other son, Craig, was a defenseman and played up at St. Michael's in Vermont. I've got a bunch of cousins. My other cousin, Paul Raymond, played at Wesleyan. He played college hockey too and played at Belmont Hill with Ian Moran that played for the Bruins. So
the family get-togethers, you better know your stuff, or they're going to hold you to it.
Absolutely. I mean, I come from a huge hockey background as far as the family goes. So even though I myself didn't play because my dad didn't want to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning for the the morning practices when I was little, and it was so expensive that it was just something that wasn't really an option for us. I played football and baseball instead, but I've been surrounded by hockey my entire life. So it was pretty natural that I would go into covering hockey like I do now.
When your passion comes out every time I get to work with you, every time the audience gets to see you, who were some of the, as far as doing on air, who were some of the early influences that you looked up to, whether you had met them or not?
What a good question. And, I've been lucky enough, Steve, to meet a lot of these people, as I've gone up and become a pro myself and covered games and mingled with people and met people at events and even worked with people. So obviously Bob Lobel, it was one of the biggest ones. And I remember him just as a sports newscaster in Boston, full of personality and fun, but also gave you the inside scoop of what was going on with the teams, and had those great interviews on Sports Final on Sunday nights. Everybody remembers when he had Bobby Orr and Ted Williams and Larry Bird all together. And I was lucky enough to do sports radio with him, do events with him, get to know him. He's a generous, great person, and just as fun when you talk to him in person. And he has that aura around him, when you do meet him. Bob Newmeyer, a guy I got to work with at Comcast Sportsnet New England and NBC Sports Boston, was another one of those guys. I mean, obviously, you can go down the list of the hockey people in Boston. Derek Sanderson's another one that, was doing the color analyst stuff when I was growing up, and I got to know him and know him now well too. And he's just as outsized a personality as you would expect him to be. And even now, having been retired for so long, back when he was such a flamboyant player in the 1970s. So, there are so many influences. I never thought I was never really into the broadcasting part of it. And, being on TV or being on the radio, I'm a writer. My writing background was where it was at. And it was more about great sports writers, growing up here, Bob Ryan, Peter Gammons, Dan Shaughnessy, pretty much everybody that worked at the Globe, Kevin Paul DuPont. Those were the guys that I really looked up to, and I kind of tried to emulate when I was going and learning and getting better and aspiring to cover pro sports. But, if you grow up in Boston, it, Steve, you're surrounded by sports media people that are legendary, that are influential, and that create this model that you want to follow.
Absolutely. So how did you get your in officially? What was the first story, or who was the first interview that you had?
Yeah, I remember I covered high school sports all through college. I went to Salem State College. I was writing for the Woburn Daily Times, covering high school hockey, high school baseball, while I was going to college. So I was working at a newspaper while I was going to school. I worked for the high school newspaper and was the sports editor there when I was in high school. I was the editor of the college newspaper when I was at Salem State College. I really knew that this is what I wanted to do. And when I was at the Woburn Daily Times, they would get credentialed for Bruins games, for Red Sox games. And I actually started off covering both the Bruins and the Red Sox for the Woburn Daily Times. And I still remember, I think it was either the late 90s or the early aughts. I can't remember exactly when it was. But I covered, my first game was a Red Sox game at Fenway Park. Jimmy Williams was the manager of the team. I remember Carl Everett was on that team and was one of the guys we talked to post-game. Nomar and Trot Nixon were definitely on the team. And I covered one game at Fenway that season. And it was kind of a treat, because I'd covered so much high school. They said, hey, kid, why don't you go in and see what it's like to cover a game at Fenway Park? And I didn't cover any pro sports at all after that until 2003. And that's when I started covering the Red Sox and the Bruins both, every home game. So starting in 2003, I was at every Red Sox home game in the summertime, and I covered some road games, and I was at every Bruins game in 2003-04, which was Patrice Bergeron's rookie season, and I've been covering the Boston Bruins ever since. So, that was part of it, and the other part of it was just doing features on local players that we had in our market, the Woburn Daily Times. And I remember Steve Langone was one of them, a kid that was from Reading High and is now in the Bruins organization management-wise, but went on to be a great college hockey player and a pro baseball player and a pro baseball player after that. So it would be more about sometimes doing features on the local guys from Woburn, Winchester, Burlington, Reading, Stoneham, Wilmington, any of those places, as well as covering the actual games while I was there. But, that started, opening doors when I got into Fenway in the Garden, covering those teams, to meet people that led to other writing opportunities, that led to other, television and radio opportunities. And it was more about, once you get your foot in the door at the big league level and you get to know people, it was about building relationships. It was about getting to know people. It was about people respecting the work that you do, seeing the questions that you ask, seeing the way you conduct yourself when you're in those environments, and all of a sudden they say, hey, this is a young kid that's taking it seriously and doing the right things, and we like what he's doing. Let's give him a shot with some other stuff. And that's how it led to writing at the Boston Metro, doing tons of magazine work and freelance work, getting on EEI in 98.5, eventually getting on Comcast Sportsnet New England, writing for WEI.com, which then led to where I am now, and writing for NBC Sports Boston. So it was like an upward progression, but I didn't take go to the Boston Globe, have an internship covering the pro sports team, and kind of get groomed to sort of be where I am. I was one of those people that had to really kind of work my way and find my own pathway to get to where I am now. And I know a lot of people along the way that have done the same thing. I remember Chris Gasper. Look at where he is now. He's on the radio. He's a extremely respected football writer and columnist at the Globe, and he does all these great things, or he's at Channel 5 now, right? But I remember him when I was at Fenway. He was there an entire summer for the Boston Globe for nothing. He was not getting paid to be there for the Globe, to blog and to work and to grind it out at Fenway and to, create a space for himself and to sort of establish himself at that pro level. He was a high school writer that was just doing it because he was ambitious and because he wanted to do it, and because he wanted to see what it was like, and maybe it would open a door for him, maybe it wouldn't, but he believed in his talent as much to go there and do that all summer. And look what that's turned into him now. And there's a ton of stories like that of people in the media that are big names now, but they really had to grind and work at it and do a lot of things for little or no money to get to the point where they are now. And in some ways that kind of weeds out the people that are really serious about wanting to do it and have the passion to do it and have the, the staying power to do it, and people that, are going to kind of give up once they hit a few roadblocks along the way.
I remember one of the first pieces I did with Gary Tangway. Patriots win the Super Bowl. They've just come back. They have been interviewed, just about everything. They're picking their suitcases up in a tent and going off to their cars. So here we are in the pitch black of night. I've got the camera light, and I'm walking backwards trying to make sure I don't topple over anybody. And we're talking to whatever Patriot would talk to us. So I'm glad people look, in their suits and everything, but that's not always the case. It's whatever, wherever, and whoever you can get at whatever time. And sometimes, they would talk to us if we kept walking. That was fine. They were heading to the car and ready to go home, even after all the celebrating, because it was more ahead of them. But those are all the situations that I myself as a cameraman want to get myself into. And that's what challenges you. Now, the last couple of decades, you have to admit, I know having been in any venue, when the team is out of it, it's thin on fans, the players don't want to talk to you. If they lose a game, nobody wants to talk to you. But the last couple of decades since you've gotten in Boston, in New England, it has been very exciting across all the boards. And I'll bet you that the other teams feed off the success of the other teams as well, because they're like, hey, we don't want to be left out of this. So that must make your job even more exciting, the success that all the teams have enjoyed.
Well, Steve, I picked the perfect time to start doing this. Like I told you, I started covering the Red Sox in 2003, right? So I got to cover the 2004 World Series. I got to cover the 2007 World Series, both of the ones the Red Sox. I mean, covering the 2011 Stanley Cup win for the Bruins, and we just had the 9-year anniversary of it. 3 flights back and forth in 11 days to Vancouver, in less than 2 weeks. Covering that series at the end of a 2-month-long run through the playoffs, at the end of a season when back in 2010, 2011, I traveled to every road game. So I covered literally all 82 games, plus all the preseason games, traveled to all of them, did all the playoffs, then did all that stuff in Vancouver. I was exhausted at the end of that, but it was a great run, so fun to cover, so invigorating and historical. Their first win in almost 40 years for the Bruins Cup, and they were great players too. And I developed a lot of relationships with them, where it was fun to cover that team day in and day out. A lot of characters and personalities on that team. But I will tell you, as great as that was, as memorable as that was, there will never be anything like 2003, 2004 with the Red Sox. That particular era with those particular players and the fever pitch that it was around the city of everybody wanting them to win, starved for that World Series title, the pressure that was on them, the idiot personality of that team, all the guys that were on that team, the attention that was paid to that team. And how big news everything was with them back then, because everything about the city of Boston was the Red Sox. They were rock stars in the city, all of those players. And I don't know that there's ever going to be anything like that again, just based on all those circumstances. And to be in the middle of all that and to be able to cover those two teams, especially the 04 team that won, and then to be able to cover it with the Bruins in 2011 when they won the Stanley Cup, and they were in their own right adored and revered, and they had 1 million people at the parade in Boston after they won. To be a part of those particular championships where I was there every day and to be able to watch them, I consider myself extremely lucky and privileged. And I just think I had great timing, as far as I was lucky enough to get in when, towards the very beginning. It wasn't at the complete beginning, because obviously the Patriots kicked it off when they won the first Super Bowl. But for most of that run, I've had a real inside perspective on all of this, and it's been extremely fun. And most days, it doesn't feel like you're working because you love what you do. And that's really the aim that all of us have, right, is to be in a profession where it doesn't feel like work most of the time, and you love what you're doing. And I just go back to, when you and I were kids and thinking about how bad some of those teams were in, the 70s and the late 70s, the 80s, pretty much the entire decade, except for the Celtics. And, to go through some of the long starvation periods for titles that those teams had when we were kids, to being adults and having this embarrassment of riches as far as sports championships goes, it's amazing. But, I picked the right time to be a sports writer. You picked the right time to be a camera guy. We got to do some pretty cool stuff.
Absolutely. It's amazing. Do you, to this very day, every time I go to any stadium, any venue, and I get to go in the locker room, I just catch a buzz like nowhere else in life. Do you still feel that?
I don't feel it as much like the surreal feeling. Like I remember when I was young and I was still in my late 20s going into the Red Sox clubhouse, and David Ortiz, Manny Ramirez, Pedro, Kurt Schilling, like Nomar, all the guys that were in there, you felt intimidated and it felt surreal. And it was like, I watched these guys on TV and now I'm in this locker room asking them questions and interacting with them every day. And there was that feeling like almost like you didn't belong at first, kind of, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that was definitely a feeling you had at first, like surreal, like I can't believe I'm in here. And that went on for a while. Like I definitely felt that for a few years as you're starting to get used to like working with these people on a daily basis and that this is your profession. But like at this point now, when I walk into the Bruins dressing room, I don't feel that as much as it's more about like getting whatever work I have to get done. And it's much more of like this is my job and I have my marching orders, and, you know, I'm going to go in there and tell some stories with the players and have some fun with them. And it's enjoyable. I still love it as much as I ever did, but like that surreal feeling definitely isn't there more. And I think that's about, you know, being almost 46 years old, having done it for, you know, 20 years and sort of like having seen everything from A to Z that can happen in professional sports, whether it's titles, whether it's, you know, I covered the game in New York at Yankee Stadium when Jeter crashed into the stands. You know, I've covered all-star games in both sports. I've, you know, been to Europe to cover NHL games. That whole trip they took in 2010 when they went to the Czech Republic and in Ireland. And, you know, so many of the different things from A to Z that I've gotten to cover over the years. I think you get used to just going in there and it's your job. And some of that sort of wonder or surrealness wears off. But I recognize it when I see it in young reporters now that come into the Bruins dressing room or come into anywhere. And you know it's their first time, and you can tell they've kind of got the wide-eyed look. And they're sort of looking around, taking it all in. And, you know, you kind of tell them, and I've done this before, I've taken younger people aside and been like, enjoy this feeling of awe and surrealness that you have coming in here now, because at a certain point it's kind of going to go away. It wasn't quite the Dan Shaughnessy speech that I've heard he gives to like young interns and reporters that if you really love sports and you're a fan of sports, don't do this job.
No.
I think he said something to that effect to young guys, and I get where he's coming from.
At this point in his career, sure.
Yeah, but I think it just naturally, the sort of fandom you had when you were a kid and when you were younger, it definitely does go away. And it's more about sort of observing the game and doing your job. But I think you'd be a fan of sports in general. And certainly you can be a fan of individual players and who they are. And you make friends with players and relationships with players. And, you know, you're rooting for certain players to do well because they're good guys and you like them. But it's definitely not about like rooting for teams or, you know, having that sort of feeling anymore. At least not for me. I can't speak for you, but for me, it's not that way when I go in there. I get paid whether they win or lose, and I always say that to people when they ask if you're like a fan of the team or whatever.
Yeah. Now let's talk about the characters, because this year's team. Let me back up to one particular thing. A couple of years ago, I'm doing a Bruins Fan Fest. They visited a variety of cities, and on the stage being interviewed by Andy Brickley was Donnie Sweeney. Yeah. And at the time, their star player was unsigned and didn't seem like, you know, he was ready to sign. And the one question that Brick said to him was Pasta. You know, are we going to lose him? He said, no, don't worry about it. We're going to sign Pasta. Fast forward a couple of years, and I go out to him because, and I love how Pasta said the 100 games, 100 points was more important to him than hitting 50. First of all, is Cam Neely, who's the last Bruin to hit 50 goals?
Cam,
okay.
Yep.
So he
was when he did it in the 49 games, remember?
Yes. Yeah. Yep. He could only play every other game or something like that. So talk about both, and I saw the little tweet or whatever it was, Joe, miss you, Pasta.
Yeah.
That was great. And simple but powerful. Talk about him and some of the other characters that you enjoy talking to on this team.
Yeah, I mean, there's great personalities in that dressing room. Pasta's one of them. He's just a fun-loving kid, and he comes from a hardworking Czech background. It was kind of a one-parent home that he lived in where his mom raised him and his brother. His dad was a hockey player that played in Europe and wasn't around a lot. And really kind of, I think there was an estrangement between him and his dad where they only got closer in his last couple of years of being alive. He ended up dying of cancer. And, you know, his story is one of a kid that really worked his way up and didn't have enough money for hockey tape when he was a kid and came from very modest means and like has all of his priorities in a row and knows what it's like, real struggle is like, and knows the joy of life and just being happy to make the money that he makes and go out and play hockey every day. And he really is one of those people, I think, that appreciates everything that he has and appreciates life. And that comes through in Pastrnak and who he is and the way that he plays. And, his personality is infectious. And I remember when he signed that contract, Steve, I asked him, the first question I asked him is, what are you going to do with the money? And he said, I'm going to go get my favorite like stir-fried rice meal at the Galleria Mall at the food court. Like that was his big purchase he was going to make with the money. Like He gets it. He's got everything in perspective because of the way he grew up and his upbringing. And, Brad Marchand, another one that's fun to be around all the time, always has jokes, always takes things lightly, understands our job and our role in what we're trying to do, asking questions, and makes it interesting for us. And you always appreciate those kind of guys. Torrey Krug's another one that I think is a lot of fun to be around. Patrice Bergeron, like I've covered him since he was an 18-year-old kid that was shy, unsure of his English, still had peach fuzz on his face, was a child, playing in the NHL, was the youngest guy in the league that year in 2003-04 when he played. Same with Pastrnak. He was the youngest guy in the league at 18 the first year that he played in the NHL. And, you build relationships with those guys when you're with them from the time that they're 18 to still covering them now. And you can't help but have those when you see them day in and day out. You try to have fun with them and make it interesting for them too, because they get the same boring questions all the time too, and they want you to kind of liven it up and make it interesting for them. So I think they appreciate having people with a little bit of character that come into the dressing room and talk to them too. And I guess that's reflected in Pastrnak when he and I are telling each other on Twitter how much we miss each other in those tweets with heart emojis and everything else. Yeah. So it's fun, but it's like that's part of the gig with me too. Is I want them to be good interviews. And I want them to be loose and relaxed in themselves when I talk to them on camera. And part of that is developing relationships with them and trying to keep it fun and light when you can. So it's part of it helps me out, but it's also about just making it fun for everybody on a daily basis to be in there. We all want to have a good time and have a few laughs working together. And you try to do that as much as you can, no matter what you're doing.
Absolutely. Help me get this right. 4 times in a row, Czech Hockey Player of the Year. And we're talking Yager. Right. Yager was the last guy to do something like that.
Tied Yager's record for that. Ooh. The Czech country itself is like quieted down as far as like the great players that it's produced. It hasn't been as prevalent as it was in the past, but now it's starting to kick up again. But Pasta is no question, at 24 years old, not only is he the best Czech player right now in the world, but like he is going to be for the next 5, 6, 7 years, one of the best NHL players in the world. And, he's going to be one of the top game-breaking scorers. And I don't think with his shot, with his approach, with the fact that he's built some strength over the years, his ability to score in the power play, his ability to increasingly on-ice awareness, passing, like skating, the whole deal. He's going to be a premier scorer in the league. And his approach, too. I think him learning the game and learning to be a pro from Bergeron, Marchand, those kind of guys, I think all of that's turning him into an absolute superstar. It has already. I voted him number 1 in Hart Trophy voting when we did our NHL awards, the professional hockey writers. So, but I think great things are to come for him, and he's going to be the face of the Bruins franchise a few years from now, if he isn't already. But, a great, fun player to cover. And, being there, seeing what he's like in the dressing room, just a fun guy to be around.
Absolutely. There's always a laugh around the corner. Technology has changed dramatically, certainly with cameras and video equipment. How has social media and technology both made your job easier and more challenging?
Well, more challenging, definitely, because it's like never takes a rest. Social media is 24/7, and like something could happen. Somebody could send out a tweet at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, and all of a sudden you've got to, put up the bat signal and start writing stories and having reaction to what's going on there. And, that part of it, I think is a disadvantage and can be a pain in the butt sometimes. But social media creates an audience you might not otherwise have. It opens you up to people you might not have otherwise realized were there, and some of the content that they create, not only in just my professional world, but just like anything, an artist, a comedian,
Sure.
like whatever. You'll see things on social media that get shared that you might have never seen otherwise. And it just makes the world a little bit more of that global village and a smaller world where, you get exposed to things you might not see otherwise. But, that part of it's great. Having access to players and them showing more of themselves off the ice, I think is fantastic. I mean, Zdeno Chara was an extremely private guy. I remember he wouldn't even tell us what books he was reading when he first got to Boston. He was like, that's my personal thing. I don't want to talk about it.
Okay.
And he's gone from that to a guy that certainly has gotten more comfortable in Boston, shows you more of his personality. And I think that's just maturation and getting comfortable in a new city. But to now, like showing some of his workouts that he does on social media, sharing his thoughts on his Instagram account, I think he's a must follow on Instagram because he's such an interesting guy. All the languages that he speaks, all the interests that he has, aside from the insane workouts that he puts himself through and his dedication to conditioning and working out and all the interesting things he brings to the table there, but just what he has to say. He's a thoughtful guy. Him marching in one of the Boston protests for the Black Lives Matter, I think that was something that not a lot of other guys did around the NHL, and I think it showed his willingness and his involvement in the community and and wanting to be part of a movement and put actions more than words. I think that's something that everybody respects. And I think it's no surprise that he would do that because that's the kind of thoughtful person that he is. So, social media giving us a window into those people's world, and especially people that don't cover the team and might not know them otherwise, I think that's a great thing. And, it's got its good and its bad. It's good at positives and negatives, just like everything else. But, we roll with the punches with the social media. And you know what, Steve, I got to head off for my kid's Zoom call, if you don't mind.
Okay, not at all. Just give me, what's your Hags the Haberdasher? My favorite is your Star Wars suit. What's your favorite suit that we get to enjoy, and when and why do you wear them? Then I'll let you go. How about that?
Oh, I love Star Wars. I've loved Star Wars since I was a kid. I actually took my kids to the drive-in last weekend. It was the first movie-going experience since the COVID-19 stuff went down. It's probably the only time we're going to go to the movies, anytime soon. So I remember seeing Star Wars at the drive-in with my parents when I was a kid. In 1977, I was 3 years old. I love the movies since then. As I've grown up, I've loved them. I try to pass the love on to my kids. My son's not into it. He wants Jurassic World and Jurassic Park. That's his thing, which is totally cool. But I've always loved Star Wars. I think it brings out like the kid side of me, and that childlike wonder has always been there for that world. And I love that Star Wars is combined with the sports world, and they do Star Wars jerseys at minor league baseball and hockey games, and I've got a bunch of those jerseys too that I wear from time to time. So, but it was a natural when the Bruins were playing on May 4th. May the 4th be with you. That's the big Star Wars day, right? Mm-hmm. When they were playing a playoff game on May 4th, I had to go out and get a Star Wars suit and wear that on May the 4th. That was a must, right? That's a layup. You got to do that.
And you wore it well, Hags. Nobody else. I didn't see anybody else. My eyes were on you.
That's
Hags,
right.
Thank you so much for the time. You're the best. Great working with you and hanging with you. And thanks for chatting.
Thanks, Steve. Take it easy, bud.
You too. Take care.